So quite a interesting weekend of racing. Mexico turned out to be qualifying, threw up some surprises. I mean, Ferrari just out of nowhere pulled something out of the bag in Q3. Where did that come from? We don't know. It seems like the drivers and the team don't know either because nobody could give a good explanation for it. But it worked. 1-2. Can't argue with that. Um, if you look at Verstappen's reaction, he probably was surprised, but certainly wasn't worried. He was laughing after, and when asked about the race upcoming, he didn't seem concerned. He was clearly confident that he had race pace, and as it turned out, when you look at his top speeds in the race, they were comparable to his top speeds during practice, which means when they were doing practice, he was on full fuel load, which is very typical of Red Bull, and something that I have touched on previously in posts before I started doing these videos, which is Red Bull wisely, in my opinion, focuses on race setup and race pace, not on qualifying. Qualifying is important, obviously, and they have a driver and a car that can qualify well, but that's not really their focus. I mean, obviously, like at Monaco, so they'll shift their focus a bit, but in general, their focus is on race pace, and it shows. The race itself, I thought, was eventful. I mean, obviously, the red flag situation certainly threw a spanner in the works because essentially it ended up being two races because it was literally at half distance. So we ended up with essentially two 35-lap races, or 135 and 136-lap race. So that was certainly interesting. And the midfield, before I get into the top guys, the midfield was impressive. The fights had me on my seat. I mean, I went to a watch party, and it was quite exciting. The crowd that was watching along with us thought it was good. There was a lot of really good battles down in the midfield with Yuki and Norris coming through the field, and Bottas and the Haas, and just a lot of really good fights. Alpines, everybody. I thought it was a very interesting race. But let's get down to the nitty gritty. The start, both starts as it turned out, but let's take them one at a time. Verstappen, like a bullet. Red Bull has traditionally not been the best of starters, and funny enough, Ferrari has generally been good starters for over the years. But this time, man, I mean, both Red Bulls just launched. I mean, they're like drag cars. They just hooked, launched. The momentum that Perez had coming into corner one was, I think he was probably going faster than Verstappen was actually. Now, before I even touch Verstappen, let's deal with Perez. I am on record as saying that he should be fired. Not everybody will see it that way, but I think he should be fired. At this level, this is professional sport we're talking about. Well-paid professional sport. What he did there was just unacceptable. I mean, yeah, there are some comparisons with what Hamilton did before or whatever, but it's not quite the same. What Perez did was just unacceptable. It made no sense. And at this point, despite whatever statements to the contrary Red Bull's management are making, there has to be a cutoff point. Next year, I fully expect Mercedes and McLaren to be more competitive. And Red Bull cannot rely solely on Verstappen to score all their constructors' championships, and championship points. And let's not forget, as much as we the fans tend to focus on the drivers' championship. This is a constructors' championship. That's what Formula One is about. And for the teams, the constructors' championship is what really matters. They're the ones who win that. All the prize monies that are associated and TV rights monies and all of that are associated with the points you earn and the championship positions that you end up in, that is what counts. This is a business. It's a professional business and it's money on the table. The fact that Verstappen is the one who is earning all the points for them essentially at this point must be of serious concern to the Red Bull management. They cannot let that continue into next year, because if Mercedes and McLaren start to score points consistently from early out in the year, they with both of each of their respective drivers, Red Bull cannot sit back comfortably with just one of their drivers consistently scoring. They have to have a second driver who is there, who is backing up the lead driver and scoring points consistently. So it doesn't really matter what they want to say publicly. This is serious, and they're going to have to address it. No professional organization can just leave this alone. We can debate why this is happening with Perez, but the reasons it's happening aren't necessarily going to impact on the fact that it is happening and has to be corrected. So I think that we may very well have a scenario where somebody else replaces Perez. I don't necessarily think it's going to be before the end of the year, but I think it may very well happen for next year. And certainly, one of the targets that Red Bull has for this year is a 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship, which they've never had before. And that's another thing to stick in their record books. And if Perez allows Hamilton to overtake him and finish third, he's not even gonna meet that criteria for Red Bull. So I just can't see this continuing, right? Verstappen, what a starts, and just dominance. He just put the gap on as he needed to, even in the second half after the second restart. Again, a great restart, but with Hamilton on mediums, and I think after just a couple laps was like 2 seconds behind him or something, he just started increasing the gap, and he just said bye-bye, and that was it. That dude, you can have your own personal opinions of him, and I do as well, but you can't argue with what he's doing in that car. Yes, the car is good, no question, but the car is not now, in my opinion anyway, as overwhelmingly superior as it was. Does it have advantages? Obviously, still. But his driving is just mind-boggling at this point. This dude is pedaling that car proper. Give credit where credit is due. That was a masterful performance. For me, that Red Bull is just on a different planet. Red Bull and Verstappen just on a strategy on point, pit stops consistent. I think they had a 2.4 and a 2.6, just like clockwork. And that lady that they have, Hannah Schmitz, I believe is her name, strategist, man, I tell you, just does not miss a beat. On point every time. Proper racing. They know, one of the things that I admire about how Red Bull approaches strategy is they're able to adjust. They know when to be conservative and when to be aggressive. They're able to adapt to the situation they're facing very effectively. The fact that they have a driver who can do that, who can put in consistent lap times when he needs to, manage tires when he needs to, produce fastest laps when he needs to, that helps, of course. But the fact is, no matter how good a driver you are, as Ferrari has proven over and over, if the team isn't on point with the strategy, you're not gonna get anywhere. And Red Bull is just on the ball. That team from every level is on fire. Give credit where credit is due. Mercedes, I have to say, Hamilton, wicked drive. The car is definitely a good car at this point. I think it's convenient and tempting to say that because Red Max is beating them so comprehensively that, oh, it's the car, it's the car, it's the car. I'm gonna temper that. There was a point in time, certainly, when you can't argue with that. Now, whereas the car is still not, it's not an RB19 for sure, but it's nowhere near as bad as people are making it out to be. It has good top speed. He can drive around Leclerc on the straight, and the Ferrari is fast. The car has a chassis that can do 36 laps on mediums, not hards, on mediums, and still manage to have the level of grip and the level of chassis balance out of medium tires at 36 laps old to set a fastest lap on the final lap. Cannot be a bad car. Cannot. That is a good car. You cannot argue that. Hamilton is extracting, the performance out of it, because he's now consistently on the podium, setting good times in qualifying. It can be a threat, and if the setup suits them and so on. But in terms of race pace, Mercedes is fast. Are they as on the ball strategy wise, pit stop wise, and so on? Not necessarily. Every once in a while, they'll sorry, they'll make a little mistake. But Hamilton is driving is obviously because he now feels that he has the car to drive. He's raised his game back to where he's a 7-time world champion. We're seeing pace out of him. But the fact that he's getting that out of the car means the car is capable of delivering it to him. That car is pretty good at this point, and I am very, very heartened by that fact that going towards the end of the season that we're seeing this pace. I believe that this bodes very, very well for 24. I think Mercedes is going to be on the pace in 24. Are they going to be as fast as Red Bull? Probably not, because Red Bull obviously is ahead of them in the development curve, and they themselves are not standing still. So their car is going to be correspondingly faster as well than the RB90. The RB20, I'm sure, is going to be an improvement. But the point is, compared to at the start of this year, and don't forget about last year, I think Mercedes is going to be starting next year at a much higher level, which is badly needed. Russell, he's good. Russell is a good driver, but I don't think he's getting to grips with the car. I think the development has left him. I alluded to it in the last video, and I'll say it again. It's interesting how the comparison between how Red Bull's development has favored Verstappen and Perez has fallen off. In my opinion, there's very, very, very relevant parallels to Mercedes' development. It has clearly favored Hamilton, and Russell has fallen off. Is the disparity as wide? Probably not. But there's no question that whatever development path Mercedes has taken is unquestionably along the lines of what Hamilton wants out of the car, and it shows. There's empirical evidence to support that. So I think that, and I think that's good. I don't see that as a negative. I think, again, this is professional motorsport. They're not doing people favors. It's not their job to make everybody happy. Each team has to do what they need to do to win. And if they identify a particular trait in a particular driver that they think that their chassis can be tailored to, so that it can be exploited to produce wins or good results, that's what they have to do. That's just reality. This is not a friend business, or this is real racing, right? So nothing is wrong with what Mercedes is doing, just as I think nothing is wrong with what Red Bull is doing. But notwithstanding that, as I said, I didn't think Russell did badly, but just not getting the best out of the car. McLaren. No, before we touch McLaren, my apologies. Sorry, let me not insult Ferrari. How could I? Leclerc. I thought Leclerc did a great drive. Norris got driver of the day, deservedly, in my opinion. But Leclerc should be a very, very, very close second. Leclerc drove very well. I think Leclerc's driving was so good that it ended up masking some errors that Ferrari made. I think because I heard a lot of people saying, "Oh, this wasn't a bad race for Ferrari either as a team, they did okay." I don't think so. I think putting Leclerc after the red flag and replacing the front wing, they could also have gone back on a hard tire, I think. Sorry, on a medium. Why did they go back to a hard? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, they have a tire deck problem, but the fact of the matter is they got through the first stint, 31 laps or 32 laps, I don't remember when they eventually changed the tire, but the mediums were working. I mean, both drivers, when they came on the radio and they discussed the potential of a one-stop, said, yes, they think they can do it, which means they felt that the medium was working for them, even up to in the 30-lap range. Why not go with a medium for the second half of the race? The car is now much lighter, right? It's less fuel. Why not go? Why not be a little more aggressive with the strategy? I think, or at least split it then. At least split it. Put one on hard and one on medium. Why put both cars on hard? I think that was a mistake. I really think so. I think they should have been a bit more aggressive. But notwithstanding that, Leclerc, great race. When he lost the front wing plate, the end plate after the incident with Checo, we expected it to drop off. Sainz couldn't make up any ground on him. In fact, he was managing second very effectively right up to the red flag. So, I mean, I tell you, I personally was very impressed with Leclerc's driving. Very, very impressed this race. He's really a good driver. I think Ferrari is just inconsistent. They're just letting him down. The what would you say now? McLaren. Norris again, spectacular. I think Piastri might have unnerved him a little bit in the middle of the season. I think Piastri came on a little stronger than Norris expected for a guy with the experience that Piastri had. But I think Norris is kind of finding back his footing. Whether this will be a trend, we don't know, because I think this track was a little bit of a difficult. It's an anomaly. Could be an anomaly. Anyway. I don't know if everybody was getting to grips with it quite as well as they should. But Norris certainly did, and he did some wicked passing. I mean, the passes on Ricciardo and on Russell were whoa. I mean, proper driving. In fairness, good driving from the people he was passing as well, not doing anything stupid. They were aggressive, they defended as they should, but not stupidly and were hitting people up. So it was good racing. That was one of the examples of what I said at the beginning, where I said this was an exciting race. Good racing, solid, proper driving, but great passes. And I mean, he really cut through the field. That McLaren is fantastic. What happened in qualifying, I don't know. They just, again, this track is weird, I think. And I think it just caught some people. I think a lot of people are struggling with the setup. Piastri, just a good example would be Piastri. He just never couldn't come to terms with it, I think. He ran okay, but not where you'd expect. The thing with Yuki, I think he was fair. Yuki was at fault for that. And I really feel bad about that, because I thought that Yuki drove very well. He's a guy that I have a lot of time for. I like Yuki. He's very emotional, very temperamental, and I think that works against him in a lot of cases, because I think that might have happened in this case. I think Norris Piastri really had his elbows out in the first couple of attempts for Yuki to pass him, and I think it kind of played with his brain, and he got a little too emotional in the last attempt, and he just overdid it, and that turning was just never on, because he wasn't really ahead enough and he paid the price for it. So he has only himself to blame. But up to that point, I thought he drove a very good race. In fact, the fact that Ricardo came what was it, seventh, I think eventually, tells you that the AlphaTauri overall had a fantastic race. To what extent this track flattered their setup is debatable, but I think it did. I think the very thin air at that high altitude helped a lot with the cars that don't have a lot of downforce generally. I think there may be just some weird stuff taking place with the aero there, and it seemed to work, because I also think that the Alfa Romeo ran better than perhaps we have seen them, because Bottas was pretty competitive. So generally, I think from the mid pack down, some of the Albon, boy, that guy could drive. I don't even him. I should have spoken about him earlier when it comes to qualifying. What happened to Albon in Q3? Albon was so fast leading up to qualifying, and then I don't know, it just all went away. I don't know what change happened in the car. Kind of weird. I mean, he still drove very well in the race, but as he always is, as I said, I think he's actually driving beyond the level of the car. But the midfield generally put some really good racing on. This track, I think, brought out a lot of the lower teams, kind of made them a little faster than they would have normally been, and really brought some interesting racing. I'm going to finish by kind of summarizing with I'm going to revisit the Mercedes situation. I believe Mercedes is now fast enough to no longer be able to make excuses. I think Mercedes now needs to acknowledge where their weaknesses are and deal with them. They have a reasonably fast car. They have a competitive car. Not the fastest, but they have a competitive car, and they have a super good driver in Hamilton. I heard a statement, I think it was last week, that Toto Wolff made about not worrying about that. He was like saying, boy, we now need to focus on pit stops. This is after the madness in Austin that they made mistakes with. That no, we need to start focusing on pit stops. But he actually said in words, which is amazing for a team principal, oh, because of all the years we had this super engine and we had this huge speed advantage, we didn't really need to focus on pit stops. That blew me away. I mean, that's actually something he said. That is a shocking statement for a team principal to make, because it tells you that they have not come to grips with the fact that they don't have the best car anymore. They've had 2 years, or now going 3 years of going into 3 years anyway, of the new formula. And if you have not recognized from very early that you need to step up in terms of the overall team effort to support your drivers, meaning the building the right car, putting the right strategies into the race team, and then having the right strategies for the race, and then having the right pit action to make that strategy to actually, what's the word that the sprinters use, to execute the strategy. You're doing your drivers a great disservice. That is crazy for a team principal to actually acknowledge that you relied on the speed of the power of your engine for so many years that you let all the other things slide. That is not an acceptable state of affairs, and not an acceptable statement to be making 3 years into a new formula that you no longer have the advantage with. I'm very, very disappointed, and it kind of solidifies and clarifies why the teams like Red Bull and McLaren and even Aston Martin in the earlier part of the season, why they gain such a huge advantage over Mercedes. And it's because they dropped the ball. Mercedes just basically dropped the ball as a professional race team. And that needs to change, because I can tell you that the other teams are coming hard in 24. I mean, McLaren is on fire, right? And Red Bull, the fact that they've stopped the development of their 23 car, like 3-4 months ago, you can just imagine what's gonna be coming in the RB20. So if you're not on point in every aspect of your team, you ain't beating them. So I mean, I make this point over and over. I want close racing. I don't need to be a fan of Hamilton. I don't need to be a fan of Mercedes. I don't need to be a fan of anybody. I want them to be fast. I want close racing. That's what I want. I'm a race fan. I want good racing. I I enjoy 100% Red Bull winning because I like seeing professionals being professional and being successful at being professional. So I have no this nonsense about dominance. Forget that. I don't join that policy. I have no problem with Red Bull being dominant, but I also have no problem with other teams stepping up and bringing the fight to them because that needs to happen as well. So that's my view. Give me your feedback. Let me be the typical vlogger and say, like and subscribe. And, till next time. I mean, what's coming up? Brazil coming up next. Let's see. That would be interesting.